Israel continues on its warpath into Lebanon today with the biggest death toll that has between Israel and Hezbollah in Lebanon since the 2006 Second Lebanese War. Up today, the death toll is now, as of today, as of just a few moments ago, the current toll is up to 274, and that is the highest, deadliest day of fighting between the two sides since the 2006 war. Based on a lot of the comments that many of the leaders are continuing to say on American television and Israeli media, we are only at the beginning, and there is a lot more to go. One of the questions that I want to explore today is not whether Israel's going to launch a war, because in all appearances, as it's already begun, but what are they going to achieve, and are their objectives attainable militarily? I think that you probably know where I'm going with this, and that answer is going to be no. It is not military attainable. And so what does that mean for the region? What does that mean for Israel? We're going to talk about all that today. First of all, I want to go to again, this was just made hours ago by Daniel Hagari, spokesman for the Israeli Defense Forces, to where he issued a warning to people in Lebanon about what's coming next.
This is an advance warning for your own safety and the safety of your family. We advise civilians from Lebanese villages located in and next to buildings and areas used by Hezbollah for military purpose, such as those used to store weapons, to immediately move out of harm's way for their own safety.
So again, that's very reminiscent of some of the things you heard from Hagari when he was talking in the Gaza Strip many times, when they were telling the civilians to move from one part of the strip to another. It's for your own safety. Move out. We're going to hit anything. Run away if you're by any buildings or so. And of course, we know that Israel just methodically wiped out the infrastructure, whether there was something in there or not. Everything was destroyed every time they did. They claimed that it was used by Hamas, and I have no doubts that the same thing will happen here. The question is, where are they going to go with this? Now, part of the reason for this really is in fact, you got to understand, everything is tied to the ongoing war still between Hamas and Israel in the Gaza Strip. And that is a big problem for Netanyahu right now, because it's basically an albatross around his neck. It is militarily unattainable. I've been telling you since the very, very first of this war that the political path, their objective that they've set for themselves, and the military means they've decided to use it, can't solve it. Now we see that just on graphic display. We're nearing the full year mark. It's now just a couple of weeks away, basically, for that war, and it's no closer to being solved now than it was before. And Israel has taken all of the military objectives that you could take, and the war still goes on. The other side hasn't capitulated. They haven't brought peace to Israel. They haven't even brought security. They can't wipe out all of the Hamas people, or better yet, they can't wipe out all the opposition to Israel in the Gaza Strip. No wonder, because they continue to create new enemies. Forever one that was ostensibly Hamas before 10/7. Now then, even though no question that thousands of what was Hamas fighters have been killed, but they've all been replaced. And there's no shortage of men in this Gaza Strip where their way of life has been wiped out, that all the infrastructure has been effectively destroyed. And so now they can't even live in there. So, of course, they're not going to be real happy about that. Well, now, what does Netanyahu do? He can't declare victory when clearly all the violence still remains. So he's going to try to change the focus of everything. So now he's going to shift to the north. And here's what their Minister of Defense, Yoav Gallant, said a couple of days ago.
מרכז הכובד עובר צפונה. המשמעות היא שאנחנו הולכים ומסיטים כוחות, משאבים, אנרגיה לכיוון צפון. לא שכחנו את החטופים ולא שכחנו את המשימות שלנו בדרום. זה חובה שלנו ואנחנו מבצעים אותה במקביל. ואנחנו צריכים להתאים את עצמנו. זה נכון לכולם, בוודאי למי שנמצא באוויר או שולט במה שנמצא באוויר, מפני שהאופוזיציה פה היא יותר חזקה. זה לא חמאס. זה משהו אחר, וצריך להיערך לעניין הזה כמו שצריך לקחת את זה בחשבון.
So what sense does this make militarily? So you have, I won't say exhausted your military, but you have put them under enormous strain, the IDF I'm talking about, with this near year of combat in Hamas. And by your own account, that war is not finished. And now all of a sudden you want to shift your focus to the north and open a new front? I mean, what possible sense could that bring in there, especially when you, by his own accounting there, I'm not completely sure you could read all those small print. I apologize if you weren't able to, but what he said was we're going to shift the focus and the center of gravity to the north, and that means personnel and resources. So he's taken away what he just told you and they have been telling you for a while is not a finished war, and they're going to take away personnel and resources, reallocate them to the north. And of course, this huge level of airstrikes that have been going on, all of which followed after the pager and the walkie-talkie strikes from last week. Truly, almost textbook. They're preparing the battlefield for a ground incursion. Now, with this latest warning you just saw from Hagari, they're telling people leave these areas if you're anywhere near this line of contact that's going on. Then also we had yesterday again. Former Prime Minister Naftali Bennett talks about what a wonderful thing that they're doing for the world.
Israel generally has been showing too much restraint, in my opinion, for the past 11 months, but enough is enough. And what we're seeing right now is the weeding out of these ARC terrorists who, should have died decades ago. Ibrahim Akil should have not existed for the past 30 years. He killed over 200 Americans, by the way. There was a $7 million bounty on his head from the United States. We're not going to send a bill because America is helping us greatly. But the point is that these are big terrorists, global terrorists, and we're killing them. And that's just wonderful news for the world.
Well, just on a human level, it disturbs me when someone talks in such flowery language about the desire and wonderfulness of killing other people. I remember the senior U.S. commander in World War II, General Eisenhower, about how he detested war. He knew what needed to be done. When he sent the troops in for Normandy, when he continued to command them all the way up through to final victory at the end of the war, he said it was a horrible thing. It was detestable, and he hated it with every fiber of his being, and that animated his decision-making when he became president, that he was willing to go all the way, even to nuclear war, but that he detested it and so bad wanted to go somewhere else. And here we have this guy literally talking about, like he's looking at a beautiful picture in an art gallery, about killing terrorists. And look, and that's one of the things that you'll see Israel is doing here is they're trying to paint Hezbollah as being this completely egregious, violent group that has no redeeming qualities, that it's doing stuff to Israel for no good reason. You're going to hear the prime minister himself, the current one, say that in just a second. But first of all, I want to know what the Israeli side, what their objective is here, because he gave a little bit of a hint there when he said we're weeding out their troops when they're destroying places where they say are the ability to launch rockets. A lot of evidence indicates that some of these airstrikes are actually hitting nothing, either empty buildings or just the sides of some of the mountains here. There's no knowledge about whether they're actually hitting these things or not. I put doubts on a lot of the claims that Israel's doing, especially when they're using an airstrike took out 1,000 launch tubes. I doubt that seriously because Hezbollah is, number one, knows that they're in the crosshairs right now, and they don't leave these things just sitting out in the open waiting to be blown up. They usually have them hidden, camouflaged in underground bunkers, and then they bring them out to fire. Then they bring them back in because they have a lot of experience of knowing how Israel works. But regardless of what it is, obviously they're killing a lot of people, so something's getting blown up there. But towards what end? I want to show you just real quick here the map of this area. I've shown it to you a couple of times before, but I want to bring out a couple of things here in particular. The map that you're seeing right here, this line right here is the border between Israel and Lebanon. And as we've talked about a lot, and this is actually animating what Israel is also saying, is that all of their people who live in these villages and towns south of the border, somewhere between 60 and 100,000 of them want them to return. And so that's what they're using as justification, where they're going in now in order to make it to where they can come back. But let me show you what they would have to do. The Israeli Defense Forces would have to go into all of these areas. I mean, just look at this, just one area on the map here. You see all of these buildings and all the terrain that's around here. There's so many places to hide. There's so many ambush spots where if armor's coming up the road, where they could get hit in the flanks here from buildings. I mean, we see this going on in the Russia-Ukraine war on a routine basis. That whole eastern front is territory not too dissimilar from this, even though it's more forested area, but you have a high density of built-in areas like this. And you have it so hard where when the Ukrainian side gets in there and they start defending against these areas, the Russians have to come in and methodically weed them out. And they have all kinds of firepower, but you still have to go in on the ground to get them out. And that's what you see would be necessary in all of this area. If you want to make it safe for all the Israelis to move in here, then you have to get all the Lebanese, all of them out of here. And we showed you a Mossad agent over the weekend that literally said that. Not one person, not one village would be left in the area north until everything was done. That's his understanding of what the actual Israeli objective is. But I'm just telling you, militarily, that's just not going to happen. I mean, that would take so many more troops than Israel has. And you can be sure that Hamas is going to be doing all it can to continue sniping in the rear to prevent Israel from moving to more of its combat troops out of the Gaza Strip back up to the north, where they would be desperately needed. Now, remember, Israel is a relatively small country. It's like 8 million people. And that's thanks for that video there, Gary. You know, that's just one of the areas here. Okay, it's easy to drop bombs. That's no problem. But have you noticed how Russia can do the same? They drop bombs, drones, missiles, rockets, everything on these cities like Bakhmut. Took 9 months to take it. Avdiivka, another 9 months. Chasiv Yar, they're going after now, even longer than that. Vuhledar, a year and a half. You see where I'm going with this. When it's something is defended heavily, and just like with the Ukraine side, they've been building a lot of these fortifications since 2014. Likewise, Hezbollah and some of the Lebanese have been building these fortifications since 2006 in the aftermath of the last war. So the task is going to be monumental for Israel. And it doesn't matter that they have a monopoly in the air. Russia has a monopoly in the air, and it still takes ground forces to go in and get that. So if Israel goes through in the last piece of this, which is to launch a ground incursion, it does not appear that they have the manpower to accomplish the goal. Well, then that raises the question: if you start a war and you don't have the resources or capacity to end it, then what? Now, I've also told you that Russia made a huge strategic error in February 2024 when it had Plan A, and that's it. It was resourced for Plan A to work, which was big show of force, lots of tanks and stuff coming into Ukraine, and the government surrendering and quitting and leaving, and then the war's over. That's what they hoped would happen, and they were resourced for that to happen. But if they started and fought, then you have to go to Plan B, but they weren't resourced for Plan B. So it took a year and a half for them to finally get up the Russians enough troops, armor, ammunition, and an industrial base to be able to sustain a long war. It took a year and a half to get up to the point to where then they started moving. And now here we are closing in on the third year of that, or the end of the third year of that war. Israel is a much smaller country. They don't have the capacity and the capabilities that the Russian side has. So if their resource for Plan A doesn't work, which is, and we're going to see in a second, that to make Hezbollah quit, to make them recognize they can't go forward anymore, then they're going to be in a big, big world of hurt, because that also requires a sustained commitment from the United States, because Israel doesn't have the capacity to make these things on their own. They don't have their own defense industrial base or the resources to make it happen. They are 100% dependent on the United States to doing that. And political will is a fickle thing in America. And even though they have it and have had it, in the last 11 months, almost blind support from the United States, both parties, that's not something you want to bank on for a long-term war that they may be fighting. And of course, that also talks about the Israeli side, their personnel. I mean, they have a lot of dissension in their own country right now. It's not reported here very often, but you had, ironically, one of the Israeli leaders over the weekend. I think it was, it was their President Herzog this past weekend. He actually admitted that, yes, we have a lot of beautiful democracy at home, and we have hundreds of thousands of people protesting against our government. Okay, that's fine as long as that balance is just a little bit more from the government. But if this thing drags into a long war and all of a sudden they start having lots of casualties, I promise you, based on history in Israel and just normal humanity, that could tip very, very easily. And now all of a sudden they can't finish the war. They are in grave danger right now in setting unachievable military objectives for a military, because that's just what they want to happen. And then they just hope that they maintain all their support at home, and they hope that the U.S. keeps giving them weapons before or continuing on. Now, I want to go to real quick to the U.S. side of this equation, because as I just pointed out, it's hugely important. They have to maintain this. Yesterday on ABC News, George Stephanopoulos was interviewing John Kirby. And he said, hey, it seems to me that Netanyahu's doing whatever he wants to do and that the U.S. has no say in any of this. How do you see it? Watch this exchange.
We just heard Prime Minister Netanyahu right there seems to be disregarding whatever the United States is calling for.
Well, look, the Prime Minister can speak for himself and what policies he's trying to pursue, what operations he's trying to conduct. We're all, of course, recognize that the tensions are much higher now than they were even just a few days ago. We certainly have been monitoring the reports of strikes back and forth across that border. But all that does, George, is underscore for us how important it is to try to find a diplomatic solution. Nobody's Pollyannish about how hard that's going to be, certainly in light of the events over the last week or so. But that doesn't mean we're going to give up on it. We don't believe that a military conflict, and we're saying this directly to our Israeli counterparts, George, we don't believe that escalating this military conflict is in their best interest. It's certainly not going to be in the best interest of all those people that Prime Minister Netanyahu says he wants to be able to send back home.
Well, I mean, Kirby just absolutely stepped on his own foot there, which takes some doing, actually. I think he's counting on you not actually listening to him and just looking at his body language and say, well, that's a person right there. He looks sharp and really is articulate. And, man, he seems like he knows what he's talking about. He's very confident in what he said. But let me tell you what he actually said. He was just asked, it seems Netanyahu is ignoring you and doing whatever he wants. And then he says, we think it's very important to find a way to de-escalate the situation, have a negotiated settlement. And, it's even in the Israelis' interest. I argue that same thing there, too. It certainly is in the Israelis' interest to do that. But then he goes on to say, we're doing everything we can, i.e., circling back to the original question, we're doing nothing. Netanyahu is just here and it's going in one ear out the other. And he says, yeah, whatever, which he has done throughout this entire war. It's even longer than that, but it's been on steroids since this war has begun, where he does whatever he wants and he ignores whatever the United States says. And this actually goes back. You can't disentangle what's happening in Lebanon from what's happening in the Gaza Strip with that war going on there. Now, I just told you that the militarily, it's at in a sense, a standstill because it's unachievable. The military tactic of winning is unachievable. So if that's your objective, now what do? Now you need a plan C almost, because you've maxed out all of your resources and all of the stuff in the United States, which is still coming in, and it's not achieving victory. So now what? So now they're trying to go up to the north and saying, all right, well, we want to stop that too. I think Netanyahu's like, let's just get one thing off the table, which is all the domestic political hit he's taking from the people who have been pushed out of that area. They put an enormous pressure on him to want him to be able to go back in. So he's thinking, we'll start pushing them back here. His plan A is, by looking at what they're doing and saying, is to scare the Lebanese people and the Hezbollah and make them back down and leave willingly on their own and stop shooting rockets. That's definitely plan A for Netanyahu. He would absolutely love that. They've even said not too much from that. But that's only so that he can then turn all of his focus back onto the Hamas. And so he's going to try some new things there. There is reports in the Israeli media over the last week or so that Netanyahu is now trying to get permission from his cabinet, his war cabinet, to depopulate the northern part of the Gaza Strip. Where they would go again, who can say, but he's trying to get them out again because, again, you see the circular nature of this. You started in Gaza City, then you went down south where you were going to get the, quote, last 4 battalions in Rafah all the way in the other end. They did that, and now they're going back again. And I mean, we've seen this movie before. This is a replay. That's not going to work either. But that's what Netanyahu is trying to do. So that gets back again to America's primary objective, which is a ceasefire in the Gaza Strip. And that's so important because, and what the Lebanese have said, and so I'm sorry, Hezbollah specifically, has said is that all of their actions here are in Lebanon. All these rockets they're firing into Israel are in direct support of Hamas. And if the war in Gaza stops, so too will theirs. So if Netanyahu actually wants to stop the rockets coming in and he wants the people to be able to go back to the north, he can do that diplomatically because that path is open. That is achievable. Even that would be very hard and very difficult because of the give and take that would be required, but that door is open as opposed to the one he's trying here. But when Kirby was asked on that in the same meeting with Stephanopoulos, he said this.
It appears that the Gaza ceasefire talks have gone cold. Is that right?
I would say that we are not achieving any progress here in the last week to 2 weeks. We have, not for lack of trying, but it doesn't appear like Mr. Sinwar is prepared at all to keep negotiating in good faith, especially after he murdered 6 hostages in a tunnel. So, I mean, just in execution style. So it doesn't appear as if he's willing to move this forward, but it doesn't mean that we're not trying. You heard the president talk about this just a few days ago. Things can be unrealistic until all of a sudden they are realistic, and that's why our team is still engaged with Qatar, with Egypt, with the Israelis to see if we can't move it forward.
And look, he reiterates again his failure from the previous clip to where Netanyahu's calling the shots. We're basically begging him to do this. He's saying, no, I'm expanding the war. Not only is he not seeking a negotiated settlement, he's expanding the war into a complete new theater of operations. And we are weak and incompetent. Impotent, I'm sorry. We have no saying here. We have no standing other than other than demanding that we keep giving them all the weapons and ammunition that they need now, which is at a much higher rate. Because these airstrikes that are going on are enormously costly in terms of resources. So whatever level we've been given, that's going to have to escalate as well because they're expending more ordnance. And Gary, I'm going to ask you to throw this a little bit out of order here because it's really important here. There is a direct tie between what's happening in Gaza and what's happening in Hezbollah up in the north in Lebanon. And that was reiterated a couple of days ago by Hassan Nasrallah, to where he openly made that direct nexus, and listen to how he puts it.
After all these attacks, I clearly say that whatever the sacrifices and whatever the consequences, the resistance in Lebanon will not stop backing and supporting the people of Gaza, the West Bank, and the vulnerable in this holy land.
And so he subsequently also reiterated, they are willing to do a ceasefire and stop the rockets. This has been stated by Qasem, the second in command, since all of this stuff started last week. He reiterated they are willing to stop the rockets if Israel does a negotiated settlement here. And I mean, look, let's just look at this even, forget the morals of it for a moment. From Israel's perspective, militarily, it would make a lot of sense to say, okay, let's just have a ceasefire here, 6 weeks, something like that. So that they can get their forces reoriented, get them some rest, even come up with some better plans about what they're going to do next, figure out what the resources are, because then that will stop the bombing here. That'll lower the political pressure on Netanyahu, and he can take other actions if he wants to. So that actually is available to him, even if he was, not exactly being confident or honest about it. But he's not willing to do that. I can understand that from another perspective, he doesn't want to do anything to stop the war, fearing that once they stop, then they'll come under political pressure externally, even from the West and the United States, to not restart it, to let it, stay off the war and to move more towards some kind of stable ceasefire that's extended or something like that. And he doesn't want to risk that because in his mind, he thinks he can still on. And let me show you what is in Netanyahu's mind. Here's what he said yesterday.
On October 7th, the Hamas terrorist monsters burst into Israel, murdered our people, raped and beheaded our women, burnt babies alive, and took 255 innocent people hostage, including many Americans. A day later, on October 8th, another Iranian terrorist proxy, Hezbollah, attacked Israel completely unprovoked. They fired missiles and rockets into our cities. They made 60,000 Israelis leave their homes along the Lebanon border, becoming refugees in their own land. In the subsequent months, they haven't stopped for a single day attacking us. No country can accept the wanton rocketing of its cities. We can't accept it either. We will take whatever action is necessary to restore security and to bring our people safe back to their homes.
You know, he has no hint of the irony of what he just said there. No country can take the rocketing and the bombing of their citizens and not take action. We won't, said he. What does he think about the other half of that equation? What does he think about the Israeli bombs and missiles that are falling on the Lebanese side? Why does he think that they'll react differently than he would? And if he needs any more reaction from that, all he's got to do is listen to his counterpart, Hassan Nasrallah.
It is nothing but a massacre, and this is the word that we are going to adopt, massacre, to be added to the Israeli enemy's crimes and massacres perpetrated over decades since the creation of this cancerous entity in our region. It is an act of war against the people of Lebanon, Lebanon's sovereignty. It is a declaration of war. It is an act of war and can be characterized as such.
So here's what you have. You have two leaders who are staunchly unmoved. Even though both are receiving rocket fire and attacks from the other, obviously the Israeli side has a lot more of them. So it's very heavily weighted from the Israeli side to the Lebanese side. But they're still saying we're unmoved. They're admitting that they have been hit hard. The second in command, Kazem, I believe his name is, yesterday admitted as such. Yes, but we will continue on. Nasrallah himself last week also added that no matter the consequences, no matter that we're on the weaker side, we will continue to fight. And again, he caveated that by saying that as long as they attack in Hamas, and if they stop, then we'll also stop with ours. So again, they make this path open where there could be a negotiated settlement that could be to end it. But Netanyahu is not willing to take that. Instead, he wants to move to the war footing. And so far, he's still moving towards plan A. I don't know if he's actually thinking that they're going to stand down. Maybe he does, but there's no evidence that they're going to. And let me tell you why, partially. From the Hezbollah military side. Now, as I just pointed out, the Israeli side has a lot more resources, certainly a lot more striking resources with an air force, air defense capabilities of its own, a modern war, and then a wide open trough of ammunition and weapons coming in from the United States. Hezbollah has some coming in from Iran. No doubt it has been coming in, but it's not anywhere near the capacity that the U.S. can provide Israel with. But that's not to say that they don't have an actual possibility of inflicting a significant wound onto Israel. If Israel goes through to the basically the last piece of escalation, and we showed you over the weekend in a show that you have senior Israeli leaders using the term push them out so that they can keep that buffer zone free there, that requires ground troops. You can't do it any other way. You can't just bomb them and leave them because they have hardened shelters in many of these places, and you just can't bomb somebody out. Ask the Russians if you can just bomb somebody into oblivion. That war would have been over a year ago if that was the case. That's not the case. And so now then, what Hezbollah, they have a couple of cards that they can play. If they can draw Israel in, and that they actually go in on the ground, they can create so much havoc for them. And their objective will be to increase the number of casualties, to drag this war out as long as possible. And even if they have to give territory and withdraw from areas under pressure, like the Ukrainian side has done, they have a chance to, over time, sap the Israelis of strength, because unlike the Russian side, which has no shortage of men, they got millions more to put in. Israel doesn't. Israel is much more limited in their resources, both manpower and in equipment, than the Russian side are. So they can't follow that model. If they don't go in and get a victory quick, remember the 2006 second Israeli-Lebanese war was 34 days. That's it. And then they they realized that they couldn't achieve any big successes, so they ended up agreeing to a negotiated withdrawal settlement, and then they withdrew, and then they came back. So that's the same place that they're at now in terms of resources. But now then they're kind of like where Russia was in February 2022, where they don't have resources or a good plan for plan B. If they go in and do that incursion and Hezbollah starts to inflict that damage, and like this one, it just drags into month after month with no apparent success and the rockets still coming, then that whole dynamic I talked to you about inside Israel politically could be a problem. The fickle political dynamics in America could start to become a problem because Israel's going to look like the aggressor. They're going to be painted that way in many parts of the world. They already are, and that can only increase it. And of course, you can count on the Lebanese side to put all these pictures of women and children on that, because the media war is just as much a part as the battlefield war in terms of global perceptions, and they'll do everything they can. And as you see, Israel's definitely doing everything it can on its side to paint the Hezbollah side as the terrorist. That battle's continuing on. But the last card that Hezbollah has is its long-range missile forces. And back in June, there was a lot on the net where the Hezbollah sent a lot of drones over some very sensitive Israeli targets, and showed that they could launch a missile into that area, that they were able to get their drones into those areas without getting shot down, and that they know where the Israeli side are. If Israel gets into Lebanon and they start to get bogged down, now all of a sudden, if they decide to do so, some of these reported 150,000 rockets and missiles that Hezbollah said, and so far they have only fired some of their lower caliber stuff. If they hire some of the bigger stuff and some of the more technologically capable, and that starts hitting into Israeli cities and penetrating the Iron Dome, you got some real trouble for Israel, no matter how much we want to give them. And then, of course, you have the danger that the U.S. could get sucked into that war, and that is the absolute worst possible outcome. And one of the primary reasons why the White House would be very wise to right now tell Netanyahu, cool your freaking jets. I don't care what you want to do. What you're seeking has almost no chance militarily to succeed, and a real risk of getting your own forces sucked into an unwinnable war, and the possibility that Hamas could rain missiles down on your country like you've never seen before in ways that have never happened. All of those things are possible right now, and we're going to wait and see how that's going to work out. But for now, that's all that we have so far. We'll wait and see what America does. We'll wait and see what the next move by Israel is, and you can count on Daniel Davis Deep Dive to keep you right on top of all these developments as they happen. Be sure and join us later this afternoon. We're going to have an update on the Russia-Ukraine war. Speaking of that one, a lot of things going on. There's Zelensky's in the United States now. He's getting ready for his big comment, or his big meeting with Biden, where he's going to give him his victory plan. Biden has a big speech at the United Nations General Assembly on Tuesday. Zelensky's going to be giving one on Wednesday. We're going to be giving you all the scoop on that, as well as what's happening on that battleground. And there's been some movement there as well. Thanks very much. Be sure and like and subscribe if you haven't. And we will look forward to seeing you this afternoon on Daniel Davis Deep Dive.